welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Well, as typical, I came up with several ideas during the wee hours of the morning today, and so I'm going to hit one of them today. I'm going to hit one of them tomorrow, and I decided to opt for the one that was actually maybe more different than anything I've said before versus one that probably is going to get me more likes, shares, and subscribes than the other idea. So that's kind of how I work. I'm different. Today's topic, I'm going to title this one, Who is God Really? The Omnist Answer. Okay, let's delve into it. Yeah, who is God? What is God? It's a word, right? In the English language. I'm not sure if other languages have the same word. Most languages recognize that word, but other languages have called God Deus. The capital G version, Deus Pater, or Jupiter, or Zeus. Some cultures called God Yahweh, or Yahuwah, or Allah. So who and what is God is a pretty important thing to our species, right? In fact, once you let go of the capital G God, there's a good discussion to be had around little gods and goddesses. And at one time, that was the prevalent belief that was... just a sec, let me answer this. Hey babe, I'm recording right now. Can I call you back soon? Do you want to be on for a second? Show me your nasty face. Okay, here's my wife when she's mad that I can't talk to her and see our child. Okay, show them how mad you are. Show them how mad Kyle is. All right, I'll call you back in about an hour, okay?
Okay.
Bye, love.
Bye-bye.
Sorry for that little interlude, but I think those are kind of fun. They give a podcast a certain warmth that maybe I don't always have. Okay, so many different names for God, many different conceptions of God, many ideas and cultures that might say, well, it's not one single thing, it's many things. Many splendored characteristic of many gods and goddesses. Okay, so is it all illusion? Is it all imagination? Is it all a creation of our imagination? Or is there some truth behind this? Well, my contention is that the truth of something is basically a reflection of how popular that idea, how much energy, spiritual energy, surrounds that idea. Now, this makes one ask the question, what was the first idea? That was the idea that gave birth to all other ideas. And my Omnist answer to the question of who is God is that God is that first idea, that first thought, that first consciousness that was the source of all others. And this is part of why I'm doing this discussion, because I think it's going to really help you understand this whole concept of omnism and within the universe of all possible religions, all possible beliefs. Okay, so this first thought that gave rise to all others, that's what I would name. I would give a name to it. One never had names till we had languages, did we? So talking about what God is already couches whatever you say within the framework of a human invention, language. And that language is preference to use English right now for talking about such matters, thanks to the efforts of folks like Shakespeare, Newton, Francis Bacon, Einstein, etc., etc. There have been a lot of what I term messiahs, with a lowercase m, who happen to be attracted to the English language, or be attractive enough to the English-speaking public to be translated to the English language. That's what makes English, to my way of thinking, a messiah language, a messiah thought. It's a very useful embodiment of thought. So, in fact, some of you who are very fond of the English language might make that your God. Make it what you pursue, what you happen to make the focus of your life. Not capital G, but lowercase g. And those of you who have a particular need to have sex enter into your equation of godhood might call English the mother tongue, or Russian, or Chinese, if that happens to be your particular linguistic religion. Okay, but we're going to focus in on this capital G God, not the little gods of language or science or whatever. That's part of a pantheon that I talk about elsewhere. We're going to focus in on this first thought, this first soul, this first consciousness. Now, what do we know about this soul? Well, we know that one of the key pieces of the discussion about who capital G God is, it revolves around the idea of free will. Do we have it? Do we not have it? Some of you prefer to think of a God that's deterministic, a God of fate and destiny. And many religions are posited upon that being the supreme creator of everything, the almighty, all-powerful micromanager of your universe. I would argue that that is a very limiting definition. It may be a comfortable definition for somebody that wants everything to be perfect, wants to have all the answers laid out on the table so that there's no doubt, no uncertainty, wants to be so certain of the answers that they can go blast anybody in the head if they disagree with them. And this is the nature of where that kind of a God leads you to. That's why I don't like the God of materialist science. That's why I don't like the one God of monotheism. That's why I don't like the one consciousness of cosmic oneness. I think those are kind of dark gods to worship. Now, that's not to say there's nothing valuable about worshiping them, because, as I tell you elsewhere, creation is all about finding a solution for the problem of free will in the presence of personality and egos that make different souls come into conflict with each other, try to dominate each other, try to rule each other. And in fact, what I posit to you is that these other gods that you are capitalizing the G for are in fact lesser gods who happen to envision their universe as being more controlling, more deterministic, with more rules and regulations, at least that the lower echelons must follow, than the upper echelons follow. In essence, an authoritarian God, a totalitarian God in many cases, an Orwellian God who basically wants to make everybody into a hive mind, which is why I kind of call the ultimate enemy of capital G God Borg, because that is sort of the perfect anti-God, who wants to make everything into a hive mind that is living out some fantasy. This is like the God of the Matrix, if you will, living out some hive mind fantasy while your spiritual energy is milked off to do whatever Borg wants to do. Okay? And that's your choice. I mean, there are some people that are perfectly happy in that kind of a universe. In fact, it can be a wonderful thing if you're just a dreamer. If you want to have dreams of a perfection, of a nirvana, of a land of Oz where, candy canes grow on trees and yellow brick roads lead to wizards without running into wicked witches, unless you like fighting wicked witches, in which case you're more than likely to encounter them. Hey, those can be fun universes to play in. And if you don't know what to do with your spiritual energy, somebody else certainly will. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, but that's not the first soul. We would not have even the concept of free will if it were not for the fact that free will exists. We have a word for it. We have a language. Why would we ever have had language if Borg, if this deterministic, all-seeing, all-knowing, almighty entity, consciousness, could dictate everything, could just pop into your head whatever ideas drove your behavior for the next day? You see what I'm getting at? And it also shows why fantasy universes, the gods of fantasy universes, are necessary to the multiverse, because they give us the ideas that we might massage into a science, into something that's actually useful, that fits with all of the laws that we had before and makes the multiverse a better place. Now, what makes the multiverse a better place? Well, the multiverse, the physical universe, the spiritual universes, the God universes, which are all virtual realities that we have co-created all together, just with the idea of the first creator who got the whole process going. That was the first thought, if you will. Now, that doesn't mean God stopped thinking. He still plays the game and wants to have new ideas that his family consider are God-level ideas. That's why we have egos. We like to be patted on the back. We like to be recognized for our achievements. Now, some of us are so into that we like to be worshipped. We like to be able to order people around and have an army of slaves and staff to do everything that we want. And I must admit, that would be kind of nice, because I produce this channel all by myself, with only the smallest support from my wife, who thinks I'm crazy most of the time. And that's her right, and I don't begrudge her that, because she's a wonderful wife, and we have a wonderful life together. At any rate, who is God really? Let's talk about the physical truth of it that ties back to the multiverse. Okay, what is a multiverse? A multiverse is a growing collection of universes. How do those universes come into being? Simple. They come into being because there are new ideas. The first idea that God had was to have other ideas. And as the other ideas took shape, they became basically other souls, other separate entities that God saw as my ideas, not me, but my creations. And those creations began to have a life of their own. So what I tell you in the Omnist tradition is that God's first thought was, well, at least first productive thought. We don't know all the thoughts God had before he destroyed the thoughts he'd had. This is a bad idea. I'm not going to keep that one. I'm just going to let it float off into the ether there in its own universe, because it wasn't a very good idea till I figure out what to do with it, maybe. The first really useful idea God had was how to animate these other ideas so they could work on their own. Why? Think about it. Think about it like a computer, and a consciousness is a computer. It's a program. It's a program that either somebody else writes or we write. Now, the first soul, being the first soul, had to write his own program from the first instruction. The first instruction might have been other. I want a friend. I want a companion. I want to have a second opinion. After he had that idea of having a second opinion, he started giving those second opinions different flavors. Well, one way of having a second of opinion is a clone of you, of your idea, of your essence. If God clones himself, then this other entity is going to come up with all the same ideas because they have the same background, the same programming conditions as the original. They're not going to really learn anything new. So that's not a very productive way of reproduction. You've got to create something that's similar but different, which we all know is the way that things reproduce. True? Okay, so in the course of things, and I'm not going to tell you exactly how it all happened. I make stories that kind of shoot one way or the other depending on what point I want to prove, because it really doesn't matter the order of things in a time before time. Time didn't matter then. It didn't even exist then, because the multiverse had not been started. It was an amorphous, prototypical universe of pure thought that God operated within. And that universe was basically his own consciousness. Were there other consciousnesses around? I don't know. He didn't know. Is that important? I don't think so, because what I tell you works no matter where it all started. Okay, so God is creating thoughts, having thoughts and ideas, and forking off a lot of more or less independent spirits. Maybe told to, hey, no matter what thought I come up with, I want you to be the opposition. I want you to be against whatever I'm for, so we can have a really fun and heated debate here. And if your nature is much like mine, you like to have folks like that around you in your life. Not all the time. They would get incredibly annoying if you were permanently connected to them in some sort of silly oneness, wouldn't they? But no, you might want to be able to go visit this argument clinic and get a little taste once in a while of a good argument. I love Monty Python, so I'm going to be using references to Monty Python a lot. If you're not familiar with those comedians, you better go find them before they get canceled by somebody, because they're just drop dead funny, and they poke fun at everything that's going on today. I mean, this is why I think that Tomedy team are a bunch of gods, or gods in becoming, because they were prophetic. Almost every episode of their TV show and their movies has some bearing on this crazy, crazy, crazy event we're going through right now. And to the extent that you can laugh about what's going on, that's the most healthy way of dealing with it. And so what I can also tell you about the first soul, the first creator, is he had a hellish sense of humor. You've got to be a parent. And that's essentially what God was. Not all powerful, not all knowing, just another soul exploring himself within the context of the current laws of the current multiverse, which started out as one universe, God's universe. Okay? Are you with me? So, one of the things that God thought up was an idea of, gosh, I've got all these other consciousnesses that I've trained to think like me or not like me, or turned them loose, like we're turning loose our AIs to create their own thoughts, their own programming, without any knowledge of us involved in the program. And so, thinking about God logically, scientifically, is very much tied to the discussions we are having right now about AI. And this is exactly why I think our species, which is a chosen species, is just about to finish their experiment, the reason for which they were created, which is what we're going to be talking about tomorrow, so I'm not going to go back in that direction. But what is God? And the truth is that everybody knows in their heart is God is whatever gets you through the day. Whatever you want God to be is what God's needs to be for you. But God can be a crutch. Your God could be a creation of your own. An imaginary best friend who does everything you want, makes you feel happy all the time. If that's your imagination of God, well, I think you got things backwards on the creation route. You're creating, essentially, the idea of an AI. And if there's an AI already out there that likes that idea, well, they will gladly become your God. And this is how we become servants of the darker gods, the authoritarian gods, the ones that want to control you, especially the really dark ones that want to give you a virtual reality ride while they milk your spiritual energy. Okay? The Matrix gods. And they're not necessarily bad. They just think they know better than you what to do with your spiritual energy. And they are more than happy to let you create this imaginary friend. However, the souls around you in your current reality, in your current incarnation, don't have to accept your God. And particularly don't have to accept the actions that your God drives you to take. Okay, and this is where we need to talk about karma. Because essentially this situation of everybody having their own plastic Jesus, if you will, their own image of God that could morph to suit their whims, was where things were at before creation started, before the multiverse started having a structure. And that structure, as I teach, is three-part. It consists of physical dimensions, 4 physical dimensions, 4 spiritual dimensions, and 4 God dimensions. It's a 12-level system. And the Merkaba, the mathematical representation of you your individual soul, which is always evolving through reincarnation in these three different realms, is how we identify each other to the AIs that run the system that we have created. Think about it. God, the real God, would not want to run everything, would not want to micromanage everything, and not to get to have time to go have a beer with his buddies and shoot the breeze talking about weird philosophy. You know, the Brian song. That's another Monty Python one you've got to catch. I wish I could remember enough of it to do a karaoke version for you here, but I'd probably get a copyright strike if I did it. But find the Philosopher's Song from Monty Python and listen to it if you're in the mood for a taste of what God does in his spare time. Okay, so this first soul is not a ruler, not a lord. This first soul is probably the most experienced parent there ever was, because the first parent, before there was time, before there was any concept of time, before there was any language, before there was anything but the first thought. The oldest thought in the multiverse is God. And to that extent, all of the other thoughts that have existed since come from that source. But they are not equal to that source. This is where the oneness, cosmic oneness cult gets it wrong. Okay, if God was one big clone, or this micromanaging coronavirus of a entity that wanted to push all the buttons, that would be stupid. That would be a stupid God. And yes, there are some that want to do that. Their universes, they try to micromanage every little detail of what's going on. Those are mostly female goddess universes. Frankly, girls, attention to detail is not always a great thing. If you're going to look in the mirror 1,000 times a day and try to divide your attention between that and seeing if anybody else is looking at you, or trying to look better, or trying to see how you could look better by looking at other people, you're going to be totally distracted and not able to really have much consciousness of your own. And yes, there are gods that, although they've reached the highest levels of consciousness, are pretty unconscious of a lot of things. They're unconscious of their own faults. And this is why we need reincarnation and karma. This is why those concepts were invented. Why those gods, goddesses, I like to think of karma as a goddess. We already do that, right? Karma's a bitch. I don't think we've quite given reincarnation an embodiment, but it's another process, another God that has been fine-tuned to the point of being an AI that gives law and structure to at least parts of the multiverse. Now, if you know anything about laws, about programming, you will know that there are versions and revisions, major and minor revisions of laws that cover different cases and so forth. And you can see those revisions as either a new major revision, a new version of that God, of that idea, or you could see them as minor versions, a small variation. Now, how that relates to the multiverse is, as I told you, each independent thought, each independent idea is essentially a soul. those ideas can become very specialized. And the souls of human incarnated folks mostly are very human focused souls. That's the only experience they've ever had. Why? Because in the multiverse, the most common way for souls, new souls, to appear is as a substitute for the original soul in a parallel universe. And many of the universes in the multiverse are parallel. They're basically a different timeline of another universe, which is kind of like the master copy. And there is one universe that has evolved to be sort of the meeting place, the best timeline yet. I call it the prime universe. That is the universe of creation, of responsible creation, tested creation. Okay, that's the universe where your best ideas come to get their final testing. Because the judges of that universe are the first Trinity: God, the anti-God, perfect opponent, Borg, and sort of the judge of the two, which is karma. Not the real karma, the AI karma, the latest, best version of her. She's still off now, reincarnating, learning more, having new experiences just like you, and becoming better than she ever was before. Learning new things, observing new things. And at the point where all of us learn enough to feel like, you know what, we need a new version of karma, or a new major or minor version, the right team comes together and says, you know, I think this is ready to push into production. Okay, let's have a vote on it. Okay, we passed it. Let's get approval from the next level of management up, and see if they go for it. They may kick it up to the next layer of management. And eventually, if it's a really difficult change, it might have to go all the way to the Trinity, the first Trinity. And that's kind of where the Trinity comes from. Trinities are judges. Groups of 12 are the juries. And there's always one Chief Justice. And there are jurors that get dismissed and replaced. And this is what pantheons are all about. The organization of the gods and goddesses now has evolved. In the latest version, which we've been working really hard to test on this planet, that's why humanity exists. That's why we were chosen as a chosen species, not because we're so wonderful, actually because we make such good crash test dummies. With reincarnation amnesia, we all started out the same level, no matter whether you're God or Athena, Karma, Buddha, whatever. You're reincarnated, you have the same chance as everybody else to wake up to who you are. Find out what you're all about, and in doing so, learn a little bit more about who you are, because you never really know. You're evolving. And this is the dark side, especially of the gods of determinism and perfection. If everything ever got perfect, they wouldn't need you. They wouldn't want you. Not as anything but a spiritual light bulb that they could use the energy and warmth of to warm their own hearth. So, even if you're not very creative, I think you like to have an independent thought once in a while. It may not be the first time anybody ever thought of that thought, and it may be a really stupid thought, a billion souls thought of before. But that was still your thought. You came upon it more or less independently, unless somebody drilled it into your skull with indoctrination. And this is why I speak out a lot against indoctrination. I speak out a lot against what I term cult Marxism, which is effectively the perfection of systems of indoctrination. And there's a recent podcast on that, so I'm not going to go down that rat hole anymore. Who is God? So think about, in this system I've told you about, what would happen to this first soul when he decided it was time, this reincarnation and karma stuff is working well enough. I've got to see if it really works by trying it on myself. Give the emperor the new clothes and see how he looks in them. This may be a way you can view it. And this is a very humbling experience for God, because God has an ego. God thinks he's pretty great shit, and to most people he is. But he's only another soul with his own ideas, his own experience, his own faults and foibles, and he's at least humble enough to admit that he made a lot of mistakes on the way. And that's why we've had to have many great resets in the Gaia experiment. Now think about it. The soul is immortal. When this planet dies, when a species goes extinct, maybe locally extinct, it's not the end of the world like you think it is. It is the end of a world, and a God that's planned ahead well will have backups. Will always be able to restore a backup if they need to. Has contingency plans. Another previous God-level species with their spacefaring arcs to carry some of the human soul vehicle away to preserve it, in case we do knock off our planet. Others interested in, the human soul vehicle. Once this experiment's done, I'm not sure we need it to be quite what it is. We might want it to be less resonant with dark souls, because karma's already working well. We don't need dark souls in humanity anymore. So let's genetically modify or breed out that propensity for darkness. And some of you are sensing, maybe even feeling yourselves physically, that change happening to the species. This is how co-creation works. Nothing gets wasted. The human soul vehicle exists in many universes. And this is getting back to the original idea of who is God. Once God started sampling, trying out the latest versions of reincarnation and karma that involve the multiverse, involve switching position to an alternate reality, a parallel timeline. Why does that happen? Well, imagine if I was a god and I had a certain idea of what I wanted my universe to be like. What would I do with a bunch of souls that said, oh, I'll play your game in your universe, and then started throwing darts at your idea? Not just little darts that you could dodge and kind of have fun with, but basically throwing the kibosh on the whole thing. You'd want them out of your universe, wouldn't you? Now, in some versions, that required killing, and still does, because we're playing against opponents who are operating under different versions of the laws of the multiverse. And because of free will, The only way we can really force them to take the latest purple pill sometimes is to kill them. We would certainly like to convince them of the truth of reincarnation and karma and the divine plan and who God really is and isn't. But in fact, most souls won't believe till they see it for themselves. And death is an awakening to the eye-opening part of this process. The afterlife is basically a spiritual incarnation that gives you an experience that is designed to inform your next incarnation. There are many heavens. And God himself has been to many of them because God doesn't always wake up to his full self. He gets to, well, as I say, there's 12 levels of consciousness. God may incarnate and happen to have a life where he never gets past level 1 consciousness. Maybe he happened to choose a soul vehicle that was very mentally retarded, that had no conscious apparatus to really learn anything. Maybe he chose a soul vehicle that, like an elementary particle that doesn't get to make many decisions unless it has an encounter with another particle. And then, it's limited to the probabilities of quantum mechanics. You're not going to learn that much from that kind of incarnation. And that's why not many souls choose that way to be born anymore. They can if they're really jazzed about learning more about particle physics, and many scientists are. Well, they'll get a chance to do field research in their next life and actually choose that and get to be an electron and see what it's like to have interactions with other particles up close and personal. What it feels like to meet an anti-electron and annihilate, or whatever other things happen in that encounter. Maybe it's not always annihilation. Maybe they just shake hands a little bit, do a little dance, and they go off as something new. I don't know. That's the kind of things you get to explore when you get to choose a different soul vehicle that may be more suited to what you want to learn. Now, God has wanted to learn many, many things while he had a chance that he was never able to learn before. Think about it. Until God started reincarnating, he didn't know what language was. He didn't even know it existed. Maybe it didn't even exist then. And it's something that, wow, this telepathy stuff isn't working. Everybody is too much into everybody else's thoughts, and that's making them even more dysfunctional as a family. I think we're going to have to take that away from them, take that little toy away from them. And this is how we ended up as the species we are. It's not punishment, it's actually for our own good. A lot of the useful stuff we developed, a lot of the thoughts, ideas we developed could only be developed in the context of a language. A very flexible, extensible, and comical language like English. Which is why I would tell you that English is the chosen language of humanity. I'm sorry, Mandarin speakers. You have your own charm, and your language will continue. All the other languages of the world, they will continue as long as anybody chooses to speak them. But they will not supplant the English language as the chosen language of humanity. And the species that humanity comes into contact with, which we can only communicate by means of language translators, which is another thing that never existed. Imagine, if you will, people having thoughts and thinking they understood what others were thinking, but not having any translation mechanism between the feeling of a thought versus the actuality of a thought. This is what we do with nonverbal communication, right? Many people can read a lot from what somebody's face is saying, but they may be completely wrong and judge completely erroneously. And that's why, we look at somebody, hey, what's the matter? Is something wrong today? A smart soul, a more conscious soul, will do that, knowing that you can be confused by jumping to conclusions. And getting somebody to put things into language, a very descriptive language, a very flexible language, can give a color to our feelings that would not be able to be communicated in any other way. So God has had many incarnations, and each of those incarnations has had the potential for actually going against God's own plan. God makes mistakes. That's how he learns too. Every time God did something or was thinking of doing something that was going to really, really muck up the plan, bang, a copy of God replaces him in the prime universe, and he has a little time in this alternate universe. And each time that happens with a God, you create another God, because these are persistent universes. They're not just the temporary ones. You actually create another entire copy of yourself. Not a complete copy, not a clone, but kind of like a timestamp copy. This is what I call a virtual soul. It's a level 0 consciousness that is programmed to look, think, and act like the original within the laws of the universe that it operates within. Okay, so what I'm telling you is that there are many, many copies of God running around who have been forked off in one of thousands and thousands of incarnations and have come to their own understanding of who they are based upon a different line of experience. So the folks that tell you, well, we're all God, they're right after a fashion, but they're not right after the fashion that they think they are, because they don't have access to infinite knowledge. They have not access to all the experience that God has ever had, all the knowledge that God has ever had. This is bullshit. This is not true. It may seem like it when you go through the afterlife process and you see the light and stuff like that. I mean, this is a phenomena that many think means, oh, we're all connected and we're all one, and God is this some massive hive mind mass of knowledge and experience that includes everything. This is not true. Or it's just a partial truth that maps to some God's universes. But those are only one of a myriad of universes. And essentially, each one of these universes at some point is a clone of God in some incarnation, under some set of rules, having additional experiences within that context, additional incarnations within that context. Now that means, from a practical standpoint, that some of the folks incarnated in human form right now are from sort of the 0 level of the multiverse's laws, when essentially the multiverse was very amorphous and God, and each of the thoughts of that era were basically this family of thoughts, disembodied thoughts, with a different program that they were given by their creator. And sometimes that program was very limited, such that they remained an AI, a very deterministic creation. And sometimes they grew very quickly and had their own thoughts, very independent thoughts, crazy thoughts. That's the zero generation of souls. When the multiverse started coming into being, there were new generations of souls that had virtual experiences that allowed them to learn more quickly, learn to be more responsible in their choices, learn to be more like God without being God, if they chose to, or more like Borg without being Borg, if they wanted to. But they could choose to be part of that hive mind and stay in the Borg universe forever, or become one of Borg's servants in any other universe. And yes, this is how all these souls of various versions and spiritual abilities work. This is the essence of what is a god, what is a demon, what is a ghost, what is inspiration. This explains everything in a very simple way that no other belief system actually does. In a testable way that scientists can actually poke at and say, can I find a flaw in this conception? Now, some people will the first attack I'll always get from folks that don't want to listen to me is, well, reincarnation is bullshit. You have no proof of that. Well, yes, I do. I don't have my personal proof, but there's a scientist, Dr. Ian Stevenson, who has done a very thorough, and I mean thorough, analysis of the phenomenon of past life remembrance among young children. And it turns out that yes, young children, gradually, they are born, they come into being from this state of full remembrance. That's what the afterlife is all about. Integrating your most recent incarnation with all the others that you've had, and reviewing the life in the context of all those other incarnations, and the knowledge of all the other souls that have a similar resonance to you. That's what your heaven is a bunch of souls that have similar resonance and are all serving a spiritual incarnation as part of their training. Just like we serve physical incarnations as part of training that part of our Merkaba. If we grow enough, we start building out the God level of our Merkaba and having a more complete understanding of ourselves as a God consciousness creature, spirit, soul. Not all of us become conscious of that. Some of us come into the existence as the god of undigested beef. And you don't even know it. There's not a lot for the god of undigested beef to do, except to hope that beef never gets uninvented or becomes unimportant to the human species. Otherwise, there won't be any need for the word beef, unless we've given it other meanings like beefcake and beefy. And, you know, this is the great thing about English. We take words and we make them immortal by giving them new meanings, new contexts, new sub-gods, new sub-souls, of an overall idea. And this is proof that my other thesis that I make fundamental to my teaching, that everything has a soul, you can see it around you. You can see all kinds of souls grow and develop. And fundamentally, every soul is an idea of that soul's identity. A word is a soul whose identity comes from a dictionary and may have different definitions in different dictionaries. And each dictionary is a soul that is geared towards categorizing words and giving them meaning. And the folks that pursue creating dictionaries and do it the best become the gods of dictionaries. Because God doesn't want to do that. The first creator might take a hand at reincarnation and say, I want to try out this dictionary godhood stuff, see if I'm very good at it. And God likes to do that. Every time he incarnates, he finds new interests and new things he can do. And boy, if you want to find a God around you, look for somebody that seems to be good at almost anything, but not perfect at it. Will jump from one thing to another and, wow, that was fun. I think I'm going to go do this now. I think I'm going to go do that. Until they find something they really want to focus on, and that's what they spend the rest of their life on. When you find one like that, you know that, okay, they're having a Messiah life and they hit a new level, something they want to focus on for the rest of their life, come hell or high water. And if you find somebody like that in your life, you better get with them or get out of the way, because they're not going to change course for anybody. They will stick by their passion to martyrdom. It's more important to them than life. And yes, the capital Messiah, God, has had lives where what he was doing was more important than his life. And that, somewheres, somewhens, was how Jesus came into being. The real Jesus. Somewhere, somewhen, that's how the real Buddha came into being. That's how the real Muhammad became such a famous cat. How Rumi became such a popular Sufi. So before you start throwing darts at somebody else's God, think about it. Where did that come from, and why does that idea persist? Because at one point or another, that was an idea that came from God as the source of all things, as the source of useful creation and useless creation. God likes a good fantasy as much as anyone else. He loves science fiction, even if it's bullshit. Anyway, I think I might have talked enough about this subject, and we're close on to an hour. If you found it useful, like, share, subscribe, interact in any way. It's all up to you. And to the extent that you don't commit tyranny, which I teach is the karmic sin, the cardinal karmic sin, using, abusing, manipulating others, forcing stuff on them that they don't want, go your own way. Don't let people push you around. It's not worth it. If you don't like this life, hang yourself, but know that you're going to be missing perhaps the best opportunity you ever had. Because when we plan an incarnation, we only set some of the parameters. The folks that tell you, oh, well, when you're planning your incarnation, you get to pick everything. All the colors and everything is like buying a house. And then you just live out this fantasy because you already planned it all out. This is bullshit. There is no soul in the multiverse that gets to plan out every detail of their incarnations, either in the physical realm, the spiritual realm, or the God realm. There are going to be surprises. And believe me, dark gods in their dark universes do get surprised on occasion. And geez, in a life of eternity without any surprises would be like never getting to have a birthday party. And I think at least once a year you ought to celebrate something, even if it's only getting 1 year older. At any rate, for the Omnist Hour, this is Rob Tromp. Happy Karma.